This meeting is being recorded. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 2 of Unscrewed, here with the one and only Carlin Borisenko and myself, Truman, from Return to Reason. We're here to try and work our way through what has got us into this situation where we seem to be screwed as a society, and how can we kind of unscrew it. You know, if you watched our first episode, it was very much just kind of talking and bouncing ideas off each other and just trying to think through stuff in real time. And Carlin and I we just got on the call like 2 minutes ago. We have not had a discussion about what we're going to talk about. I've got a few things on my mind. I'm sure she does too. But that's what this is, just trying to process this stuff together and bring you guys along with us. Carlin, did I miss anything? Is there anything I should have said there? We're both really tired too. So if that was a half-assed intro, I apologize.
No, I think that sums it up nicely. I think that, yes, we were both really tired. I have to say, Truman, I'm like really impressed with us for getting to episode 2. We did it. I feel like that was like a big hurdle for us to like. The first episode is easy, but getting to that second one is maybe a little bit more of a commitment. So we'll hopefully cross our fingers and get to episode number 3. But no, I definitely have some ideas for what I want to talk about today. And just so one of the reasons I'm tired is I actually spent the weekend at an art event that I got invited to because I spend too much money on art. And I have to say, I was thinking about our podcast while I was at this art event, and it was like, and the reason I was thinking about it was because I was in the real world. I was in the real world around normal people who do not think about this stuff all the time. And it even felt a little bit awkward to me at times, like, because, you know, you get into like small talk with people like, oh, what do you do? And what do you do? And I say, I complain on the internet about politics. And you could see kind of like their body language was immediately like, oh, let's not even talk about that because it's going to bring down the entire mood of the event. So it was at the same time, you know, and I think it gave me hope, I suppose, that there are still normal people out there.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting, because that's one of those things that, so I was at this last weekend, I was at a brew fest. So I guess it would have been, so today is Sunday. So last Saturday, I was at a brew fest, and it was the same kind of thing. So I was at the farmer's market the night before, and then I was at the brew fest that day, and it's just normal people, man. There was probably, you know, I took a picture of it. I have all this stuff that I mean to post to my locals, but then I'm always uploading stuff because it takes so long. I meant to post a picture of the line was probably, I don't know, had 500 people in it for like the regular tickets. And there's probably already another 300 people in there for the early bird. And of course, no one's wearing masks. People were just eating, you know, hanging out, talking like normal. And it's one of those things that there's a balance there, right? Because what you said, like about feeling that at that art thing, you know, people just living their lives and not concerned with all this crap, you know, that's kind of encouraging, right? And then there's other venues, or I guess settings, situations where that same level of like complacency or ignorance is something that just pisses us off, right? Because it's like, I want people to live their lives. I want people to do normal things. I was at the brew fest. You were at the art thing, right? So we want people to go about and live their normal lives, and this shouldn't be 24/7 for everyone. At the same time, if you took those same people and, you know, it was like, hey, what, you know, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about like a vaccine passport or something like that? And they have like no opinion or something like that. Then it's like, okay, I want you to live your normal life, but I also need you to at least be somewhat in the game, like whenever it's required of you. So I don't know how to strike that balance, you know, in terms of, you know, I think you brought this up, man. This is a long time ago, maybe 6-7 months ago, talked about just feeling fatigue of trying to get people to care, and having to explain some of this stuff to people, in terms of like why they should care. And I definitely feel that as well. And so, yeah, it's a weird balance. But I mean, dude, I was just at Walmart for 4 hours waiting on this oil change. And there was two other couples who just happened to be there. One of them had a flat tire. The other one had some other thing happen. They're both traveling. Neither of them were from where I'm from. And my phone wasn't fully charged. So I ended up talking to them for quite a while. And so this older couple brought up, somehow we were talking about, I think we were talking about my daughter, and they said, "Oh, she sounds smart," and something about schooling, or she'll have to have good teachers. And I said, "Yeah, we're homeschooling our kid, man. No one sane is going to put their kids in public school right now." And this older woman said, "Oh, are you guys, what's the critical race theory fight, like for you guys up here?" And I was talking to her about it. And then this other couple, that was a younger couple, traveling through from, like, I want to say Arkansas, or it was Alabama, I think. And they were also keyed in and were talking about it. And so, like, as I was engaging with this lady, they were also chiming in. And so it was one of those things where it's like, I think people are like in it whenever, or people are starting to, like, we're starting to see more people who are in it where it matters, and so that is encouraging. So I want to see people that are normal people who are speaking up and fighting this stuff, and also living their lives and saying, "Hey, we're not scared of this Delta variant." It got that Delta variant at the same time. So I don't know. That's just kind of me rambling, which is what this is going to be the whole time, by the way.
Well, isn't that the whole point of this to begin with, for us to kind of
Sure.
shoot the shit and try to make something productive out of it?
Yep.
No, I mean, I actually think, like, let's just reflect on that for a second. You were in Walmart and you had a conversation with like 2 or 3 different couples about critical race theory. Like,
Yep.
can we just reflect on how amazing that is? First, like a year ago, no one even knew what this was. It was like people like you and me going like, "This is dangerous. Don't like, this is not a good thing." And of course, there were many people that came before us that we learned that from, right? So it wasn't. I'm not trying to insinuate that it started with us at all. But it's like the fact that it's making its way into pop culture and into, like, I mean, we're seeing, like, I saw someone on Twitter sent me a video of a school board meeting in which the parents just absolutely revolted against all of this stuff, and the superintendent was like up in front of the school board saying, "We're not teaching critical race theory. This is about what the equity committee is doing." Mm-hmm. And the parents saw right through it, and they knew exactly what was going on. And there was just like this whole line of parents lined up to say, "You need to cut this crap out," and calling them out.
We see right through it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, thank God people are starting to see it, because I mean, like, I really think, I've been thinking a lot in the last couple weeks about, I don't know another way to win this fight other than we have to wake people up that are frankly like moderate Democrats.
Yeah.
I don't think that this fight is going to be won just by preaching to the choir on the right. Right. We have to wake, and the part of the reason I don't think it's going to be won by doing that is frankly that a lot of people on the right, and I don't want to set aside like the conversation in Walmart or the school board meetings or any of that.
Sure.
But a lot of people on the right just don't fight back in any meaningful way. Right. Like, a conversation in Walmart is awesome, and it tells us that like people are starting to figure out what this thing is, but that's not meaningful pushback where it matters. Right. That's sure. It's kind of like the first level of it. Right. We have to get people talking about it before we can get them to a school board meeting, before we can get them to write a letter or an email or stuff like that. So I don't want to diminish it. But I routinely see, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this. Maybe I'm being cynical. Maybe I'm being black-pilled. Maybe I'm just tired and cranky. I don't see the right fighting back. The only people I see fighting back are like you and I, like former lefties that kind of understand how to do this,
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've said for a while, and that we understand this isn't like just the run-of-the-mill culture war that it's been for the last couple decades, that the left is something different, and people on the right don't see that. But what I would say is the Venn diagram of naive and complacent moderate Democrats and naive and complacent moderate conservatives, I think is really close to a circle. And what I mean by that is that they have the same problem. It's just in a different kind of way, but it can be boiled down to the same problem. Is that they just frankly don't understand the severity of what we're in. That's it. Mm-hmm. That the moderate Democrats think that, this is just the excess of a few people that has no systemic power, and they'll be fine and this will all blow over. And I think probably where they might deviate from the moderate conservative some is that for them, there's much more of a social pressure to, like one of the things I said the other day is we're dealing with this shitty government right now because a bunch of Democrats wanted to feel good about themselves. That's it. And so I think that's one of the parts of it, but you get people who, just like what we talked about last time about how there are some people who are on the left who understand some of this, but they don't quite get it in its entirety. I think I used Jesse Singal as an example, and there are others like him. Claire Lehman sometimes would fall into that category. And so these are people that have some utility, that do some good things, but don't take it the necessary steps to be substantive in terms of pushing back because they don't get it. They don't understand the monster. And then there's this thing on the right. I was waiting to tell you about this for this episode. So it's so funny. A buddy of mine from high school texted me the other day, and it was pretty close to 4th of July. So I guess this would have been maybe like about 2 weeks ago. And there's a friend of ours who is pretty far to the left, a person who also used to be a very good friend of mine until I stopped being like a Bernie bro socialist, kind of guy. But he posted this really satirical thing, I guess, on Facebook about, how freedom isn't free. And I'm just thinking about how, freedom is not free and the cost of freedom. And he was just being a smart ass. And my buddy screenshotted it to me because I'm not on Facebook. And he said, "Is he joking?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it's pretty obvious. He's making fun of conservatives who would say this." And so then me and my buddy just start talking. This is a friend from high school who's pretty hardcore conservative, lives in a very rural area, has for his whole life. And I said something like, I don't blame him, and him being our friend who is making fun of the conservatives. I said, don't waste your time engaging with that. It's the people that are like indoctrinating, people like him into this kind of stuff that I'm much more concerned about. And I said something about how this stuff is dangerous. I don't know, somehow. And he said, "Oh, it's not dangerous. It's just, they're just bored." And I'm like, no, what do you, and I said something to the effect of, the fact that you don't think this is dangerous and you think this is just people that are bored is half of the problem, dude. I said, this isn't a personal statement about you. But conservatives have been conditioned to think that everything the left does is communism or socialism. And so whenever that something actually does come around that does kind of embody that, that the pundits on the right have cried wolf for so long, that all the conservatives have learned they have to do to fight back against the left is post memes on Facebook about Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, and maybe vote every 2 to 4 years. and he got kind of offended at that. And he's like, well, this is just, he talked about the small town he lives in. He's like, well, where I live, this stuff isn't a problem. Like, he's like, they're going to find out that if they push us too far, they're going to awaken the sleeping giant. But where I live, it's about the FFA and all this other stuff. And this stuff isn't here. And I said, I'm sorry, man. But, and I went through all of these lists. I'm like, if you have the internet, it's there. If, your school is getting funding from the federal government, it's here. If you have these TV stations, it's here. And this idea, I think Kevin has brought this up before, where it's like, these conservatives who think that they can just sit on their porch, with their guns, and that's the extent that they have to provide any pushback. Like, they don't have to actually get in the game. It's the same thing as with the left. They don't understand both of these, the moderate left and the traditional conservatives on the right, the Fox News conservatives, are the same in that they both do not understand that we have crossed a threshold into a unique conflict. That the left, those people we're talking about, you're saying we need to wake up, which I agree. They do not understand that the left has morphed into something more dangerous, that their party, that their side has become captured at an institutional level by something that is much more sinister than they realize. At the same time, these conservatives on the right who do not engage firsthand with the left, usually it's filtered through Fox News or memes on Facebook or whatever, they also don't realize that the left has become something different. They think of the left, they still think it's like a bunch of snowflake vegan soy boys who can't, open don't know how to use a can opener, and and so they don't take it seriously. And I mean, there is that part of where the left thinks that conservatives are immoral, and so that gives them license to treat them a certain way if they think they're evil. But the right thinks that all of these people on the left are stupid, and I think that causes them to underestimate them in a lot of ways as well. And so my point is that I think the problem is the same, is that on either side of it, you have to wake them up that the left has changed at an institutional level and needs to be taken seriously in a way that they are not currently taking it seriously. So I agree with you that there's those on the left, but I think that there is probably a similar, if not the same size demographic on the right that with the same message could also get in the game as well.
I'm even going to go one step beyond this. I agree with everything you just said. I also want to point out specifically that there's also a faction among the people who consider themselves anti-woke, or the ones that are fighting back against this, that are focused on completely ridiculous things. Like completely absurdly ridiculous things that have no relevance in anything at all. And I mean, frankly, I think, unit like Claire Lehman, I think is one of those people. I would say like David French is one of those people. I would say like
David French, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, and so they exist on both sides. I usually call them the intellectuals who are intellectualizing about the problem, where all they do is spend all day sitting around talking about the problem and then patting themselves on the back for being so good about talking about the problem. Frankly, I would put John McWhorter and Glenn Loury in this position at this point, because I just feel like they're so academic at this point that they've completely lost touch with the real world. And I don't think that these people are being any help in fighting back either. I mean, we can look at the battle that Chris Rufo has been fighting for the last couple of weeks as the primary person out there, where all of a sudden, all of these people who are like anti-woke are coming out and saying, we don't need to ban critical race theory. We can intellectualize our way out of this problem.
Speech.
And it's a free speech issue. It's like, which is, of course, is ridiculous and has been disproven on numerous occasions and has already been ruled on by the Supreme Court. And they are completely wrong. And it's just like, that to me has been one of the most disheartening, like black pill moments of the last couple of weeks, is seeing all these people just come out of the woodwork. And I'll tell you what, too, when New Hampshire was trying to pass that law banning critical race theory, FIRE actually came out in opposition to the law as it was written in New Hampshire, even though the law literally said, and it had a section called General Provisions that said, you can teach every single concept in this bill, you just have to teach it as objective and not as truth. You have to teach it as something that, like, some people believe this, other people don't believe this. You can't teach it as like objective fact.
FIRE opposed this?
FIRE opposed it. I was so pissed. And this was actually one of the reasons that the bill became really difficult to get passed in the form that it was in, because, Chris Sununu was already working against it to begin with. And then FIRE came out and opposed the bill on free speech grounds, and the Democrats latched onto that. And it was like, has anyone even read the bill? Like, and I guess what the point I'm trying to make is less about, I could bitch and complain about New Hampshire all day, every day. But like, the point I guess I'm trying to make is that we have a group of people that believe that they are the ones leading the fight against the woke, that have absolutely no real world experience whatsoever, that are not talking, that are not having the conversations that you had at Walmart, that are not having the conversations I'm having with just like average everyday people on the street when I go to like town meeting, like Republican town meetings or things like that, just to like talk to people to make sure they understand what's going on. They're not having those conversations. They're only talking with each other. And so any solution that they come up with is going to be inherently inapplicable in the real world, because they haven't tested it in a real world setting.
And that's really interesting about FIRE, because I mean, we talked about John Haidt last time, and John Haidt is still someone that I respect tremendously. I think Moral Foundations theory is probably one of the most important books written in the last 20 years. But that he would oppose that, and Greg Lukianoff, I would be interested to see if they issued specific statements about it, because I would be curious what their rationale was. There's no way that they would persuade me that it was the right decision, but at least I could maybe see if they were making it in good faith, which I would assume they would be, but then it'd be based on ignorance. Thinking about, so you brought up David French. I listened to whenever you're listening to him debate. It was Chris Rufo, right, on Barry Weiss's Barry Weiss's podcast. I love Barry. I think she's great. She's one who I think still doesn't quite get it, but I think she gets it more than most and enough for it to matter. And so, but whenever there was that one kind of throwaway line that went under the radar that David French said that I think it explained the whole disconnect to me, where he said that we have two different things, two different competing ideologies, and he was referring to critical race theory and like anything else. And he said they're both attempting to explain history and look at these things, and make a good and give a good faith explanation for these things. And I was like, whoa. Like David French just said that critical race theory is a good faith attempt to do this. And it's just not. And so that just shows the underlying ignorance. And so much of this goes, for me, is that like, I just keep gravitating to two different things. The colleges and the news media, and just the total control of the news media that this kind of leftist, talking points, that Eric Weinstein would call the GIN, the gated institutional narrative, what they have control of. Or he also, so the gated institutional narrative is what's approved, but he calls like the media and tech and everything the DISC. It's the distributed information suppression complex. And so it's like they suppress and distribute what they want to do to support whatever the institutional narrative is. And I really think that someone like John Haidt or Dave French, or Greg Lukianoff, or any of them, I think that probably part of the problem is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's probably similar to what we talked about last time with the media, where these are people who probably have not landed on all of it's bankrupt.
Yeah.
They probably still think NPR is a credible news source, right? Like they're probably going, okay, look, I know CNN is lost. I know that, MSNBC is lost, but I mean, the New York Times still has some good stuff, and NPR is still largely independent, and as long as you have that, you are going to be living in a very different reality than the rest of us. And that's going to because everyone, even the experts, even the people that we look at and go, like, you're smart, you're someone I respect, like I, am kind of looking to you for guidance on certain things. Like they're just people too. And they, they can't pull all of, synthesize all of truth and all of current events just out of their ass. They have things they're going to look at also. And so I think as long as that there are people like that who will listen to a podcast on NPR about why critical race theory is just a lens or something like that, and they'll bring on, some teacher of gender studies or CRT at Berkeley to talk about it, then they're going to have bad information about this thing. And so it seems to me like if you think about like a black hole just sucking everything in, and just the power is so great, it feels like the totality of our media to shape reality and higher ed to crank out activists that kind of incentivize that stuff is so powerful to me. There's just two examples of that really fast, and I'll kick it to you. One of them, we saw this with the Cuba thing, whenever we had these protests in Cuba, and that are still going on. And how does it trend on Twitter? Cuba is protesting over lack of COVID vaccines and other things. And it's like, no, they're starving to death. What are you talking about? Like that is the fake news right there. And then just today, so I'm looking at about these protests going on in France right now about so Emmanuel Macron, do you know what's going on in France?
No, fill me in.
With their vaccine stuff. So Emmanuel Macron gave a speech, and he said, all healthcare workers are required to have the vaccine by a certain date in September, even if they've already had COVID. Or they will not be paid, because France has a nationalized healthcare. So they will not be paid, and they will be fined and can face jail time if they don't have the vaccine. Oh. They're also going to have, they're talking about COVID vax passports to get into bars, all this other stuff. And so there's these massive protests going on in France right now. If you try to look up what's going on in France and just Google it, France COVID vaccine passport protests, you'll find one decent article about it from The Hill. all the rest of them will be framed as, because I was literally just doing this, all of them will be framed as anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorists protest vaccines in France. Okay. BBC does not have one story on what's going on in France right now. BBC International. I checked UK and BBC International. Not one story about the massive protests in the streets of France right now against Emmanuel Macron. So the point is and same, they're shaping how we think about Cuba. They're shaping about what's going on with France. They're shaping all these stories about the Delta variant, right? All of this stuff is being constantly just shut. Like, there is one narrative, and once one does it, like, people think that there has to be some conspiracy theory, like where they all these clandestine meetings on Thursday nights and they all get pizza and wings and decide how they're going to destroy America. No, it's just, you kind of understand what you have to do whenever you're in these situations. One person breaks a story, that's the story. That's what we're doing. You see this all the time. Whenever, like, I saw this with the inflation stories last week. One outlet releases a story on inflation. NPR did it. They framed it as economic growth, which is fucking crazy. But anyway, and then I see in rapid succession, CNN, NBC, MSNBC, New York, all of these doing stories on inflation, kind of spinning it. And the point is we're going to get ahead of it. We're not going to say this is Biden's fault or the Biden administration. One, actually, NBC, I think it was NBC or Politico, did run a story saying that that this is probably the Biden administration's policy's fault. One, so in all fairness, but that's it. And so my point is that, you know, if we're going to go back, in terms of waking people up, I think anyone that does not have just a universal distrust of literally all media outlets, universal distrust. Okay, so yes, left or right, I don't care. And doesn't look at all of them skeptically and say, okay, I'm going to try and figure out how do I sort the facts from the spin, from the editorializing. Anyone that can't do that is going to be misinformed in a leftward direction without realizing it. And so that, to me, is the thing. Like, why did Fire come out against that bill in New Hampshire? Because they probably had a fundamental misunderstanding of what CRT was and a fundamental misunderstanding of what that bill is trying to accomplish. Where did they get that misunderstanding from? Probably from the whatever NPR, All Things Considered piece they read. Of course, I'm just speculating there. But if it wasn't that, it was something like that, is my point. It probably wasn't from them doing, like, listening to James Lindsay for 10 hours, right? Like that, they didn't do that.
Right. No, I completely agree with everything that you just said. And, you know, it doesn't surprise me at all that the BBC didn't do a story about France, because I have a friend in the UK right now that is, like, basically sending me stuff all the time about how he can't even live a normal life anymore because he doesn't want to get the vaccine and they need passports to do everything. And he can't even, he desperately wants to get back over here because he was doing a lot of work over here before the pandemic. He can't even get over here because people from the UK cannot come directly to the United States. He would have to quarantine for 14 days in Mexico and then try his luck at the southern border and getting across to the States. And then, bizarre. You know, it's the craziest thing in the world. But it's like, no, I completely agree that like you know, where people have to start with and you know, I think it's important to specify for people who might be listening to this, that I think that and correct me if I'm wrong, but like when we say critical race theory, we're kind of using that as a general moniker, not just for critical race theory like proper, but for like all of the things that are going on in our society. Am I right in saying that? I kind of use it as a general term for like everything woke at this point, because I think it's
when I say
understand
CRT, I am specifically talking about CRT.
Okay.
Now, if I was going to talk about the general stuff, like I need to do a full thing just on far left orthodoxy and exactly what it is, because to me, even just talking to, I guess by the time this airs, it'll have already happened. So we're actually Kevin and I talked to Benjamin Boyce yesterday, which was pretty cool.
Oh, cool.
And he was like, and even Benjamin Boyce said, he's like, I just call this wokeness, you know, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I think I have a term for it, but, you know, I mean, either way, when I say CRT, I am specifically talking about the conversations that are specifically about CRT. But if you're just going to say this stuff in general, the racial stuff, I mean, so let me ask you, whenever you say just an umbrella term, are you just talking about the specific racial stuff? Like all of the specific racial equity kinds of things?
I am specifically talking about how everything that is going on with trying to move our society left, from critical race theory being integrated into schools and frankly into every other area in our society, government and business and all this stuff. I'm specifically talking about the fact that all of this is designed to destabilize our society. That
Mm,
to me is the pinnacle of, like, when you
yep.
understand what wokeness is, you understand that every single thing that is being done, whether it is specifically critical race theory or not specifically but maybe tangentially related to critical race theory, every single thing is about destabilizing our society. And once you look at it from that perspective, then you're able to better interpret what is going on. I think the problem with, like, the David Frenches, and the Fire Guys and all of this stuff, and it's not, and I think that I just want to make sure I put a really fine point on this. Like, it's not that they aren't incredibly smart people. They're very smart people. They have all in their own way made valuable contributions, right? But they are missing the fundamental piece that all of this
Mm,
is designed to destabilize our society. And so if we start with that, and I absolutely agree with you that the media is the most critical role in all of this, because and people who do not yet understand that the media on both sides is lying to you. It
yep.
doesn't matter left, right, center, it doesn't matter. They are lying to you. They are telling you a story that is not the full understanding of the experience. And that could be either they're doing it with malice, they're intentionally crafting a narrative and then cherry picking things that support that narrative, or they're doing it out of ignorance or frankly laziness a
Yep.
lot of the time too. But whatever the reason is, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you trust any media to tell you a full and complete and accurate story, then you have not yet grasped that the purpose of all of this is to destabilize our society.
Yeah, I think what I'm really glad that you added that caveat, because if you didn't, I was going to say that exact thing that you just said, which is
Mhm.
that people, whenever you hear you're being lied to, they are expecting a boogeyman. It sounds crazy, and they're expecting it to be some kind of malicious, hand wringing Bond villain. And it's like, it doesn't have to be malicious for them to tell you half truths or to tell you things that are just only convenient to what their perspective is. It's kind of like if I had a product or if I was selling something
Mhm.
and I was trying to sell it to you and I wanted you to think really positively about it, like I would probably talk up the good parts and I probably wouldn't bring up the negatives. I would want to highlight the good things and I would want to diminish the bad things. And so that's not necessarily because I hate you, but it's because I have a preference that I'm trying to push on you. And so, like, that's what these news outlets are doing, is that they have an agenda, and it just is. It's, you have to think about it like that. I think one thing that I've heard Michael Malice say that I think is really good is he said this will all be a success whenever every single person thinks of journalists the same way they think about tobacco executives. Is it a journalist or politician? I think it's journalists. Think of as tobacco executives, where it's like they do not have your best interest in mind. They're going to say what they need to say, um, and they're going to lie, but it's just kind of part of the gig because this is the business they're in, and it is what it is. And so I think that we have to get to that place where it's like it's not personal, right? Where people need to
Mhm.
understand it's not personal, um, and and yeah, like that's I think the part that's missing. Whenever I talk to Deb Philman about just the experience that I had in education and just all the crap from the district, part of the story I told was my friend who's the behavioral psychologist, and I wanted to get his story right because he experienced way more than I did. And one of the first things he said is that people, whenever they hear about illegal things or bad things going on in education, they want a boogeyman. They're expecting a boogeyman.
Right.
They're expecting like the Trunch Bowl from Matilda or something. And they don't think about how just run of the mill incompetence and cowardice can have catastrophically, if it's incompetence and cowardice at a systemic level that is everywhere, that is going to have way more negative consequences than even just one person acting maliciously on purpose.
Mhm.
And so people have to change their paradigms about how they think about these things. I had one other thought that based on what you said, and I lost it.
Wow.
So maybe I'll think of it again. But
Hopefully it'll come back. But I know, I think you brought up a really important point there. And frankly, like, I want to offer that I do think that there are some people who are, I mean, probably at the very top of this little game, that are absolutely acting with malice. I just think they are an incredibly small percentage of the overall situation. I don't think I think, this is something that comes into play a lot in schools, I think, where especially now that a lot of parents are learning about critical race theory and learning what to watch out for and things like that, they've somehow convinced themselves that teachers are going into classrooms and telling students white people are awful and that if you are white, you are a horrible person. And although I can point to very select instances of something very similar to that happening, it is not the norm in how this happens. It's like it's dished out in these small little nuggets over
Howard Zinn
time.
stuff.
Yeah, it's Howard's, like, with the books that they're reading, or the lesson about equity, or how they're changing what Martin Luther King did and framing it differently, or things like that. It's these small little things that are going on. And one of the things that I really tried to emphasize to the lawmakers in New Hampshire was that, so one of the things that got removed from the bill in New Hampshire was a provision that you could not teach that America was a fundamentally racist country. They removed it from the bill entirely. And I was like, that's the ball game. When it comes to schools, every single thing that they are teaching that impacts that we might consider critical race theory, it comes from that provision. And so if you allow them to teach that, you are allowing them to teach everything that they need to teach in order to indoctrinate your children. You're allowing them to teach 1619. You're allowing them to teach, that you're allowing them to teach all of the negative things in exactly the way that they were doing it before. Now, the good news is, and this is a little ironic, I want to offer just a nugget of like sunshine in this. The fact that
okay.
So there's a list of, so have you've heard about this like Zen like education pledge that the teachers are taking? Yeah, so basically it's like all these teachers are bravely and stunningly and coming out and signing this pledge saying that they're going to teach critical race theory no matter what the law says. And so a whole bunch of teachers in New Hampshire came
even
out,
though we're not teaching critical race theory.
Yeah, we're not teaching critical race theory, but they're going to do it anyway. And so a whole bunch of teachers in New Hampshire signed this pledge, and I'm looking at it going, okay, here's what's going on. None of them read the bill in the first place, so they didn't know what was in it. None of them read the updated version of the bill that actually took out the provisions that would have prevented them from teaching critical race theory. So they literally have no idea that they are now allowed to teach everything that they were probably teaching before, that literally nothing has changed with the passage of this bill, but they have no idea because they haven't read the bill, and they refuse to listen to people like me who are saying, here's exactly what's in the bill and how this is going to be applied. They're never going to listen to me. And so it's like they're allowed to do absolutely everything that they were allowed to do before, and they have no idea because they've listened to the lies of the media and of the Democratic Party to tell them that these things are now illegal. And I just think that's insanely hilarious. It's like literally nothing has changed for you, and all you had to do was listen to your political opponent to tell you that nothing has changed, and you still couldn't wrap your head around it.
Of course not. So I remembered what I was going to say, and it actually goes along with what you just said.
Excellent.
So you're talking about people trying to destabilize society, right?
Yeah.
And how that's the goal. I was listening to Bridget Fetisi was talking to her cousin Maggie during like one of these unfiltered like check-ins that they do. And it was like after she had this kind of interesting experience on the 4th of July where she was wearing like American flag pants, and some lady was like, "Are you a Republican?" And anyway, she was talking about that, and she brought up about how she quoted someone else who said that a lot of these activists, the people that are trying to destroy society right now, are actually apolitical. Like, they don't care. They're not for the left or for the right. They're for the destruction of everything. And so any time that a person on the left thinks they're on their side, they're not. They're just trying to destabilize things. And, it's funny. So you're talking about like these people that are basically, it's not cosplaying. I think that term gets used a little too much. But whenever they're making these pledges, and it's not even engaged in reality, I think that kind of goes to the power of the media again, to where it's like they're having an argument with nobody, right? Like this is an argument with nobody if they're thinking that this is that they have to take this pledge because this is under threat. We see this with climate. We see this with bans on abortion, or bans on, or the expansions of abortion. We see this stuff on the left and on the right, where they get these little snippets of information from whatever their source is that tells them how to think or how to feel about this stuff, and they run with it without anything else. And often they're fighting windmills, and what ends up happening that I think is a big problem there is that the people churning this information out, like a Brian Stelter, there's someone who I think is a bad actor. I would put bad actors like in the category of bad actors of people that are completely ambivalent to the harm they're doing, and that's the entire CNN anchor staff.
I want to push back on that. I know I might be derailing from the point you want to make, and I apologize, but like I don't know if I can consider Brian Stelter a bad actor. I don't know if I agree with your definition of bad actor, because I think being stupid is different than having malice. And I think Brian Stelter is an idiot. But can you be a bad actor if you like if you are just like, I think
what I said was I would put in bad actors people that are ambivalent or completely disregard the harm they're doing. So here would be two scenarios.
So it's like they're playing it like a show.
Yeah, like and they don't care. So like if a person gets drunk and goes and drives a car and drives into a crowd and kills people because they were drunk and on a bunch of drugs and stuff, like I would put that in the category of a bad actor. It's like you didn't do that on purpose, but you were reckless enough and had enough of a disregard for the consequences of your actions that the outcomes were the same as if you drove into that crowd on purpose. And so that's what I mean by that, is that these are people that are just lobbing fireballs into the social discourse and just shredding the social fabric and just do not care about. I mean, this is one of the things we talked about. I think is around New Year's or a little like at the beginning of January, where it's like, if you're actively trying to get me to hate other people, for no other reason than to like make it where we don't work together, and so that as long as we're divided, we're not looking at you. That's a bad actor. Again, if you have no regard for your actions, if you don't think, yeah, this is actually harmful, I would put him in that category for sure. I mean, because I think there's a negligence there, is my point. Like, so that's what I mean by that.
So would you put the intellectuals who are intellectualizing in that category as well?
I would need specific examples. I mean, what I'm talking about specifically is like, if you're running stories talking about how dangerous or a threat to democracy or harmful conservatives are, or something like that. CNN just did a story today that was half of Americans. This is what's so crazy. This is these people's bread and butter is hypocrisy, right? Is double standards. But it was half of Americans are skeptical about or don't plan on getting the vaccine. So all it was that don't plan on getting it. So that'd be someone like me who's like, hey, I think if you're 80, you should probably get it. I'm not going to because I've already had it. So like they lump people like that in there. And it said are skeptical or won't get a vaccine, which they then reframe as being anti-vax or a conspiracy theorist. And then they said, or are skeptical about the legitimacy of the 2020 election results.
Oh my God.
And it was about how like there's a big overlap between these two groups. And it said that these people are a dangerous threat to society, that they are dangerous. Whether you doubt the legitimacy of vaccines or of Joe Biden's presidency, they're not just wrong, but they're dangerous. And I'm like, these are the same. It's like, and they talked about how they don't trust science, how these people don't believe in science and don't believe in elections. And it's like the same people that thought that Russia is what got Donald Trump elected for 2 years and said, not my president, and that the 2016 election wasn't legitimate because of Russia, and that the virus couldn't have possibly come from a lab leak, are now saying that these other people are the ones who are undermining elections or are a dangerous threat to society. So That's an aside, but that's just an example of what I'm talking about there. Like that kind of rhetoric is so intentionally inflammatory and like has the potential to cause massive amounts of harm to the social fabric, to just divide us. And they just shove that stuff down our throat 24/7. I mean, the right news outlets do it too, where they talk about, dunking on the libtards and like where it's, and how anyone that might support some of these progressive bills, even if they're ones that I don't support, must be a communist or something. And it's like, maybe they're just misinformed, So anyway, but that's my point, is that that's specifically what I'm talking about, is the people who in order to get ratings, in order to, keep the temperature high and keep people in fear, are just pissing people off and getting them to hate each other by using that kind of language. Like, hey, if someone doesn't want to get the vaccine, they're a dangerous threat to you and to your life. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you, man? Are you serious? Like, why would you put that out there? But those are the people, and they are destabilizing society. And the thing that I was thinking about is like, I think that those folks that like, this is a thing that they think they can control. Like they're making the same mistake as, honestly, like I think the people in the media are making the same mistake as the complacent people on the left and the ignorant, complacent people on the right, where it's like they think this is all under control. They think that this is fine, that it's like that they understand exactly the nature of what they're dealing with. And they have no idea. They do not understand the nature of what they're dealing with. I think just like we talked about last time, I don't think Nancy Pelosi actually supports this stuff, right? I don't think so. I don't think Rachel Maddow does. I really don't. I think they're just kind of saying what they say. I think she might, but I don't think she does to the degree that she probably seems like she does. I think Don Lemon probably does. Brian Stelter definitely doesn't, And so it's like, I think Joy Reid does, but it's one of those things where it's like the majority of them, like Chris Cillizza, like I don't, from CNN, I don't think he does. They're just saying what they have to say. Terry Gross at NPR, like, no, they're just old school Democrats that think that they know what they're dealing with when they really don't. And so, but the point is that it is destabilizing society. I think that you're exactly right there when you were saying that this is the goal, is to destabilize society, is to destroy institutions, to indoctrinate young people. The chapter that Kevin and I are on for Road to Serfdom right now ends talking about the necessity of indoctrinating young people to get them all on board with whatever their stupid ass plan is. And that's the goal of a lot of the CRT stuff and this Howard Zinn stuff, is that like, if you get people to hate their country and not have any pride in their country and have no perspective about history, then it's going to be really easy to get them to undermine it. It's like, yeah, why not throw the Constitution out?
Well, and guess what? Guess what now too? I mean, listen, we are now in a reality where back when I was in college, people studied abroad. Now, I never got to study abroad because my parents were like, if we're paying for you to go to college, your ass is going to sit at college and, you can travel later in life and like whatever. But a lot of people studied abroad in college. So they got to get outside the country.
I studied a lot of abroad in college.
Ah, ha, 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 ha. But a lot of people study abroad in college, and so they go and they experience other cultures and they see that things are different outside of the United States, and maybe they're in some place like uber nice, like I don't know, like a lot of my friends went to Sydney, Australia, but maybe they go somewhere else. And I think that just even that mere act of getting outside the country and living outside the country probably was one of the things that gave people perspective about what this country in relation to the rest of the world, right? Guess what? We don't have that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That is completely gone. Not only like we like in a couple of years, I mean, imagine this, because I don't know that, I mean, this is actually an interesting question. I didn't even actually think of this until we were just talking this out, but I wonder if there are actually any colleges doing study abroad program right now. And will we get to a place in just a couple of years time, if all of this continues in the direction that it's going in, that we will literally have a full like 4 years of college students who have never left the United States because of COVID and have absolutely no perspective of what the outside world is like in relation to the United States and vice versa. That's scary. Like, that is breeding ground for indoctrinating people to hate their own country. If they have no perspective about what it's like here compared to other places.
I would say it depends on where they go.
Well, yeah.
To be honest, because if they go to like, I mean, here's the problem. is that what is going on in Europe, what they've done in Canada, what they've done in Australia, what they've done in a lot of parts of Europe, what they've done in New Zealand, is in terms of restricting people's freedoms, like carte blanche, because of COVID. Those are the exact policies the Democrats would like cream over being able to do, that they want to be able to do. And so I would say there's a chance that if you send them to the wrong country, that they're going to come back even more radicalized. I mean, this is one of the things that Hayek wrote about. This is so fascinating in the early 30s, was that students in the UK were going and studying in Germany, and they would come back to the UK, or they'd come back to the United States. And the quote, this is almost verbatim. It was, they would come back unsure of whether or not they were Nazis or whether they were communists. The only thing they were certain of was that they hated their own country. And of course, this is before World War II. So my point is that I would say if they're going to places like Rio de Janeiro, or if they're going to Mexico, or they're going to China or Malaysia or or India, a lot of those places, then yeah, I would say that's probably, then what you're saying is exactly right. Like whenever I was in China, we were in a nice city. We're really close to a university where we're staying, but there were still people like burning garbage in the alleyways. We went a couple hours outside of town, and we went up to this mountain that we climbed, and there's streams running down on either side of these ditches, and it's like sewage water that people are like washing their clothes in, and it's sewage water, and so it doesn't take a whole lot of that to make you go, holy hell, I've got it. Right. I've got it I'm pretty fortunate where I'm at. But the other aspect is, so I would say, let me kick it back to you. Let's say no kid studies abroad for the next 5 years, but they're taught actual history, or they're taught about, like, any of them are exposed to like Yeonmi Park's story in North Korea, or what things are actually like, or the reality of human trafficking, or in India where they don't have plumbing in a lot of places. And so they're all, crapping on railroad tracks, and they all have hookworms in certain areas. I think that or if they're taught like exactly what like the Great Depression was like, or exactly what the United States was like in the 1800s, early 1900s, or they're taught about communism, like they're taught about the killing fields. They're taught about the Ukrainian genocide. I would say, that would probably honestly, probably a stronger effect on helping them have some kind of appreciation. Oh. So do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think they could get that through another way.
No, I completely agree. Like I said, I've barely been anywhere in the world, and I have some understanding of what is going on. But I also do, I mean, I do think that there is something to be said about travel. And I think maybe it's not just study abroad, but, is the average college student going to go to some place like India right now? No. Are they going to go to China? No, they're definitely not going to China. they're like, I mean, even of their own volition. And so I do think there is something about just being exposed and seeing it for yourself that does kind of like, it clicks something in a way that like reading it in a history book can't. But I mean, point well taken. I think if people were actually taught actual history, this would be much less of a conversation, because I think there are other ways you can learn about these concepts. But the problem is they're not being taught history, and they're not going to be taught history anytime soon unless they're being homeschooled or have a really industrious history teacher that probably wasn't trained as a teacher anytime in the last 30 years.
Yeah. So here's a question I have for you that I just thought of. Actually, I have like 2 questions.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking a lot about information trajectories. And like, do you want to do short-term or long-term? Because both of them there's similar kind of questions, but with very different topics. One of them has to do with the next year. The other one has to do with like 10 years from now.
Let's do short-term first.
So short-term, what do you think the success rate, because it feels like the summer, the way I was thinking about COVID stuff with summer was that it was going to be hot. People wouldn't want to wear their masks. It'd be easier for them to not want to. They're going to be outside. And that a certain percentage of the population will be a lot more resistant to going back to wearing them in the fall, despite, people's efforts to try and get them to do that. But you're seeing this in the news right now. I mean, like what I have like on my, I always keep like I still say that I think one of the best ways to kind of read what's going on is just download these news apps and get the headlines. But some of the ones on CNN right now are about, it's about vaccination, and how cases are rising in every state, and how there's America is this country that's divided between the vaccinated and unvaccinated, and how we have a pandemic of the unvaccinated right now, and how the unvaccinated are a real threat. And I'm seeing this on NBC, I'm seeing it on NPR, I'm seeing it on CNN. And it seems like they're really trying. You're seeing, what's the physician that CNN has on all the time? I can't remember her name, but she is the one who said we have to make life hard on those who are not vaccinated. They're the ones dragging us down, and we need to get them on board. She was also, if I remember right, the one a couple months ago who said that time is ticking, in order for us to tie vaccines to like government aid to these states. So they have to mandate this stuff. And so my question is, and a lot of this is so much of life kind of revolves around like the school schedule, because college students are back in classes, and the kids are back in, K through 12. And that's just impacts a huge portion of the population. Teachers are back working. And so my question to you, and I don't really know how to put a fine point on this, but hopefully you'll kind of understand the gist of what I'm saying is we're seeing lots of these colleges that are making it mandatory for students to have the vaccine in order to come back to school. And same with professors. And we're also seeing where there are some places that are saying, like Anthony Fauci said that students, this was like last week, said that a kid that's unvaccinated or unable to get vaccinated 2 years or older still needs to be wearing masks. And so it's like, how do you see the COVID thing playing out over the next year? And so I guess there's kind of two things there. So do you see it, again, I'm sorry, I'm formulating this question on the fly, but it's just like this general idea I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks. Do you see it intensifying and getting more and more heated, or do you see it becoming like more of a thing where, I think that there's a chance where people that are wearing masks are going to be the ones who are uncomfortable in certain settings because they're going to be the minority. Like, so I went to church this morning and there's a few people wearing masks, but like no one else is. And one of them was like a kid who was like 8. And so also I have this whole other part of my mind where it's like, how many more kids who are like 4, 5, 6 that are wearing masks can I see before I start to be a Karen and call out the parents and say, hey, you're abusing your kids, just so you know, like, I don't, because it's getting harder and harder to not do that. But anyway, like my question is, do you think it's going to get worse? Do you think it's going to get more tense or less tense? Do you think people are going to get like more and more people are going to be over it, or they're going to be just slip right back into that compliance thing? And then going forward, why I say a year out is like, how do you see this impacting the 2022 midterm elections, if at all? And you don't even have to include the elections part, because I honestly don't think that's as important as the societal stuff.
Yeah.
But just where do you see COVID going in the US right now? I'm going to add one more thing to it. Sorry.
Okay.
To add this other
to make
layer.
it more complex.
I'm going to make it more complex. I know. I asked one of these questions to Benjamin Boyce, and at the end, I was like, I just realized I dumped like 46 tons of crap on you, and I don't know. There's not even a question in there, so I'm sorry, but do the best you can. But so not just societally, but think about the economy, anecdotally, but this is the same things that I used I don't know if you saw the article I wrote last May of 2020, where there was these big job numbers that came out and everyone was surprised. And I wrote this article. I was like, this isn't surprising at all. Here's like 15 things that I saw that told me that the economy is doing well. So here's stuff that's in the opposite direction, where I'm seeing multiple businesses, some small independent businesses, others, including like Walmart, where certain departments are limiting their hours, or like there is a few restaurants where they are closed. We're like, we can't get kitchen staff. Everywhere has a now hiring sign. And so, but there's places like, we were closed on Mondays. Now we're going to be closed on Tuesdays as well, until we can get enough kitchen staff. The Walmart Tire Center had a thing that was like, we're no longer open from 7 to 7. Now it's 9 to 6. And so that's cutting their hours by 3 every day. And so I'm seeing this on there is a coffee place, on this other restaurant, like where places are, they can't get help. And so their hours are being limited. And especially for small businesses, that limits how much money they're making, which makes it harder for them to hire. So it becomes this cyclical thing that can drive us more and more into some kind of stagnation because of these. And this is where I get so pissed off, is this is where I'm saying, like, we have this shitty economy right now because a bunch of Democrats wanted to feel good about themselves. And so they voted in this administration that just sent inflation through the roof. Look at gas prices, look at all this stuff. It's like, no. Okay. Trump had the pandemic for quite a while and it wasn't like this. Like, do not give me this shit that this is some lag behind. No, this is pure Democrat policy, pure and simple. Like, I'm sorry, it is. Just so they could feel good about themselves because they're embarrassed by Trump. It's like, eat shit, go somewhere else. I can't stand this. Anyway, sorry, I'm really mad. I can go on and think about that. But so that's an economic thing that I'm starting to worry about, that I'm seeing there. So whenever the economy gets hard, that's where you see people are more on edge. You see people lose hope. They're more likely to be radicalized or more likely to be violent. So yeah, I guess just where do you see COVID going, like over the next year? Like, where do you see it going societally? Like, do you think people are going to be over it, or do you think it's going to get worse? Or do you think both? Like, as people get over it, the authoritarians are going to be even worse to try and grasp for power? I mean, just what do you think, man?
So okay, there's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah.
But I was thinking when you were talking about the economy stuff is at this art thing this weekend, it was I had to drive 2 hours north from where I live up into the White Mountains, which is basically like the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. And there was one gas station near we were staying in a hotel that basically looked like it was out of The Shining, which was pretty awesome. It was a great hotel, but there's like one gas station near the hotel. And so pull into the gas station to get some snacks and things. And, we see on the door, we're so sorry, we're short staffed right now. Please submit an application to come work here. And the same thing in the hotel itself. It was like, like we went out to lunch just at one of the restaurants. And again, in a very, very nice, swanky hotel. And they were completely short-staffed and couldn't even handle half of the dining room that they had, and the service was terrible and the food was terrible because of it. And it was like, but really the thing that I was thinking about most when you were talking about that is at this big event, they were doing dinners every night, and so they had like the hotel wait staff come in, and there was one guy that was wearing a mask. No one else was. There was one guy on the hotel wait staff that was wearing a mask, and he was a younger guy and he was very skinny. And I turned to Victor one night and I said, do you think he's wearing that mask because the hotel is making him because he refused to get vaccinated? Or do you think he's wearing that mask because he's Antifa and he is genuinely afraid of this virus? I mean, maybe you don't need to be Antifa to be genuinely.
I don't know if Antifa.
But it was like he had that look about him, like he had the dark hair and he was like, very skinny and kind of a little unkempt. And I was like, do you think he's doing this voluntarily or he's being forced? And the answer that I came to is, I bet he's doing it voluntarily because he is genuinely scared and has bought into the propaganda of this virus. And the hotel just gave them the option, and he kept wearing the mask because it's what he was comfortable in. And I think that, for me, one of the things that I've talked about, and I've been talking about this since the beginning with the mask issue, was that I have always been worried about the psychological ramifications on society of having people run around with something covering the thing that they use to express themselves, and what that means, and what it means not only for them speaking up and voicing their opinion, but also how that reflects in their own self-worth. Because the amount that we express ourselves from just like a psychological standpoint, the amount that we're willing to share our opinion in the world is directly related to our self-worth, how much we think our opinion is valuable. And so if you have a society that is wearing something over their mouth for, full year and a half at this point, they're going to be much less inclined to express themselves. And this is actually something that, I got a strike on my YouTube channel for even talking about this, because there are papers coming out in peer-reviewed journals that are talking about this exact same impact. And so I think for me, one of the biggest impacts of COVID on our society and everything that happened in relation to it is honestly just on the psyche, more than anything
Yeah.
else. And I think that everything else is going to stem from that. Like, we have taught people over the last year and a half that, you don't really need to get a job. I mean, the reason that these places can't hire people is not because there are not workers available. Of course, there are workers available, but they don't need to work right now, or they're scared to work, or they have, or this, that, and the other. Or maybe they don't feel like they can even go out and apply for a job. I mean, I know, like, I talk to people every single day who seem to be convinced that there are no jobs available. I'm like, what are you talking about? There are jobs, like, available everywhere. It might not be the exact job you want right this second, but that doesn't mean there are not jobs available. So I think that there's that. I think we're going to have a lot of self-worth issues, and I think that those self-worth issues are going to translate into how people exist in the world, right? But I also think there are absolutely going to be, like, economic impacts with businesses, just like you said. If they can't get people on staff to work certain hours, of course they're going to make less money, and that's going to lead to people being disgruntled and cranky and, scared. And one of our primary drivers of our experience is our survival mechanism. Do we have the ability to put food in our mouth and to have a roof over our head? And if you do not have the ability to put food in your mouth and have a roof over your head, you are going to be behaving in really unhinged ways, because all of your energy and attention is going to be directed towards, what do I need to do to put food in my mouth and put a roof over my head, right? I mean, I think short term, I don't think it looks good. I think things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And I do not have high faith in the 2022 election in terms of fixing the problem, because we need to add another factor in, which is the Republicans are absolutely going to shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
They're absolutely, I mean, we had Jenna Ella, and I actually felt a little, Truman, I have to tell you, I felt a little vindicated, because you know that I like nothing more than, like, reading the Republicans, the Riot Act, about how much they suck, because they suck really, really, really badly. And I do
I've
it
heard
out
you
of,
say this.
I once or twice.
Yeah, once or twice. Yeah.
Well, I do it out of love, because I feel like I can see the potential of what they could be, and then they just keep screwing. It's like a parent to a child, and I don't mean to put myself in, like, it sounds a little more condescending than I wanted.
I know what you mean.
But it's like, what are you doing? It's like when you give someone a good slap upside the head, you're like, what do you do? Like, cut it out.
We saw what they could be not that long ago. We saw what they could be under Trump not that long ago. We
saw so clearly what they could be, and then they just deviated from it entirely. And it's like, I have absolute faith that the Republicans and the RNC are going to self-sabotage in this election. And we saw that with Jenna Ellis leaving the party last week and basically saying, you all need to get your shit together. Like, I'm not going to be part of this party. And I think we see this over and over and over again. And, so we'll see what happens, but I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of faith that 2022 is going to make a big difference. I would actually rather the Republicans learn a little bit more of a lesson and lose in 2022 than they lose in 2024. I want them to win the White House back. Like, cross their fingers as long as they have a good candidate. And, to be honest, now I'm kind of terrified, because Rick Grenell came out and said just the other day that he talked to Trump, and it sounds like Trump's running. And Rick Grenell's not going to say that publicly if Trump isn't running. I'm sorry, Rick Grenell is not like a rookie, right? He's putting information out there that he wants people to have. And so
probably because that straw poll at what was it? What was the
CPAC?
CPAC, yeah. Might have been the thing.
Maybe, but it's also like, I don't, I really go back and forth on this. And I think that Trump running again would be the most entertaining thing that's ever happened, ever. Do I think that he's the best choice? No, not by any means. And especially if Ron DeSantis is in the game, I think Ron DeSantis is a much, much, much better choice than Trump.
But I don't think he's going to run. I don't think DeSantis will run.
Why not? Well, not if Trump does. I think if Trump runs, DeSantis will defer, and then he'll end up being like Trump's VP or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, well, it's funny. You're talking about them shooting themselves in the foot. So Dave Rubin just interviewed Kevin McCarthy the other day, the House Minority Leader. And Rubin asked him, how do you plan on winning back the House in 2022? And Kevin McCarthy said, by doing exactly what we did in 2020. Oh, and he started to lay out an explanation. I'm like you fucking lost in 2020, man. What are you talking about? And so it's like that to me, and I think Kevin McCarthy isn't like, I think he gets it in a lot of ways. Like, he still supports Trump, I think. But as long as, like, there's that kind of attitude, and maybe, that's just a politician saying what they have to say. I wouldn't expect a super deep answer, I guess. But yeah, I mean, honestly, so I've really had to, because it feels crazy. And I have to question my own sanity whenever I have this thought. And the jury's still out on that. But I think that if Trump did run in 2024, not only would I want him to win, I would urgently want him to win. I think if it's the same Trump as that we just had, assuming he doesn't come back with some kind of batshit, vindictive thing. Because the more I think about it and the more I just look at the contrast we're experiencing right now compared to what we had for the last 4 years. I mean, we just said it, right? We saw what they could be. We saw what it could be. We saw the power of this populist movement to bring people together, to have this big tent conservatism that says, we don't care what skin color you are. We don't care if you're gay or straight or whatever. We just care about these values, and this kind of general philosophy of governance. And so that type of Republican Party that can have Blair White and Richard Grenell and, former lefties like you and I, and Peter Thiel and, whatever, just go down the list. That's better than the alternative, man. I think that it would show that this thing wasn't, I think the other thing that would happen there, and I know we're getting off on a what if, hypothetical Trump scenario, but there's probably some utility there. I think that the establishment Republicans need to learn good and hard that Trump was not a fluke, that MAGA was not a fluke. It wasn't just a one-off. They have to contend with those issues, and contend with that demographic, and that demographic includes people like you and I who say, you are not guaranteed our vote. You have to take this seriously. We're not going to be catered to. We left the party that just did the surface level catering to us, right? We're not going to accept that. And so I think that in order for, you said they need to learn a lesson. I think that's the lesson that is the most important lesson for them to learn.
I agree.
Is to take that seriously. Not to say it's perfect. Okay. I get that, but nothing's perfect. Okay. So that's a meaningless caveat. But that is the most important lesson is fight. And, like what we talked about last time is it's they make this mistake of thinking that if they are nice or say certain things, the media will be nice to them and won't call them Nazis and racists. It's right. Nope, they absolutely will. They don't care. So you need to learn this lesson. They are not your friend. The media is not your friend. Chris Wallace isn't your friend. Okay. Don't worry about them. Worry about the voters. Worry about the people who are showing up to these rallies. Worry about the people who are showing up, in Washington, like you were on January 6th, where it's I'm just here to support this president. Worry about those people. And I say that as these are the people these are the real constituents. And so it's that's the lesson I think they need to learn. And I think if it means Trump coming back, look at the governance, look at the contrast.
Oh, I
contrast know. U.S. 2 years ago, do July 2019 compared to today. Look at the economy. Look at where we were at with China. Look at where we were at with the Soviet Union. It wasn't perfect. Trump did not do a good job of handling the riots or the protests in Hong Kong, for example. But it's by and large, it's such a night and day difference that to me, we got to get back to that, whatever it takes, because this is death, man. The way we're going, we're dead if we go down this road of governance. If we don't rip each other apart, these fucking Democrats will just do it just by their shitty governance.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean?
I don't disagree. I do want to offer one clarification in that the main reason I went to DC on January 6th was to see what was going to happen for myself, so the media couldn't lie to me.
As soon as I said that, I know. As soon as I said that,
okay.
I'm because whenever you and I are talking about it, we know that we're just talking about
Yeah.
We're talking about January 6th in reality, not this unarmed, insurrection, media farce.
Not in crazy
So that's
land.
what I mean. I'm talking about the reality of it. Yeah.
No, totally. And I know what you mean. But no, I mean, I agree with you. I think that things were largely good under Trump. I mean, there are absolutely things that he did that I do not agree with, that I do not think he handled well. And to be frank, it's kind of a miracle that things were good under him, because my understanding of the internal order and the staffing in the White House was that it was not good. It was like a shit show.
Pure chaos.
Pure chaos. Yeah. No one knowing what they were doing, not coordinating stuff, not so I mean, the fact that they were able to achieve what they did was in and of itself a miracle. And I do think if you on the whole, I do think that it was a positive administration. I do think it was a positive presidency, and I wouldn't necessarily be upset if Trump got elected again. I think that Trump probably learned a lot in the first term, and I think that he could do a lot better the second time, having a more robust understanding of what he's up against. I mean, and let's be honest too, the greatest gift of the Trump presidency is he opened all of our eyes to what is actually going on. And so, I mean, and can you imagine even being in his shoes and having, I'm sure there were so many things that he stumbled upon that he didn't even expect were as bad as he thought they were. Maybe he thought they were bad going in, but then he actually got to see it. It's like, oh my God, what am I even doing? And so I do think that I wouldn't be upset if Trump got elected. I just think it's one of those things where I just don't know that it's the best idea. But if it's not,
I don't think it'll happen.
I don't think it'll happen. It's worth. But I if it's not Trump and it's not DeSantis, then I don't know anyone else. I mean, maybe I don't know anyone else that I consider to be a reasonable candidate that I think could actually get the nomination. If someone like a Rand Paul got nominated, I'd be psyched.
Ted Cruz wouldn't be bad either, to be honest. But I don't think he'd get it.
Yeah, I don't know that I would be. I think Ted Cruz is doing more than most. So I do have to give Ted Cruz props. I wouldn't mind Ted Cruz as much. So, I mean, they've got some options, but again, I just go back to the fact that I absolutely believe that the GOP is going to shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, that comment by Kevin McCarthy, to say, we're going to do what we did in 2020. Well, guess what? In my congressional district, they ran They lost. They ran a guy in my congressional district named Matt Mowers, who had Trump's blessing, was the one of Rick Grinnell's favorite people that he promoted all the time, and he lost by 8 flipping points. And he lost by 8 points with Trump on the ballot. And so what is the New Hampshire GOP going to do? They're going to nominate him again, because of course they are, because they just don't learn lessons from the first time. Yeah. And there are reasonable candidates that are coming around that are, starting to campaign against him. And, there are a couple that might give him a run for his money in the primary, but it's the New Hampshire GOP is going to rig this. I know that they are. Maybe not rig in the way that the Democratic Party would, but you know what I'm saying.
There's kingmakers. Yeah, there's
absolute kingmakers. And I will tell you that they did not learn their lesson from this guy losing the first time. And it's do you want to lose? Is this what we're playing in? And it's just so frustrating. It's so frustrating to watch it when I feel like people like you and I just have a different perspective on this, where we can again, just going back to we saw what it could be. We saw the potential, and the potential was so good. And now even on Twitter today, and Twitter is not real life, we have to acknowledge that. But I mean,
think it is.
I think it, it could be.
Twitter is terraforming reality. Twitter is terraforming reality.
That may be, but I mean, not even just today, but for several months, there's been this debate on the right on Twitter about who should be allowed on the right. Well, I'm sorry, you just spent the entire 2020 election telling us that the right was a big tent that welcomed everyone. And now we're having an ongoing 6-7 month debate about who is allowed to be on the right. This is exactly the reason that I only lasted a month and a half in the Republican Party. I think it is.
I think it's a fringe group that's doing that.
I don't think it is.
Well, because if you look at the thought leaders of the right, even people that you and I maybe wouldn't like that much, okay? Ben Shapiro is not having that conversation. Dan Crenshaw is not having that conversation. Kristi Noem is not having that conversation. Ted Cruz is not having that conversation. Ron DeSantis is not having that conversation. And so there are some fringe people that, like a Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes has like 100,000 followers, or he did before his Twitter account got blocked. Like, there's always going to be some group of people that suck, but I just don't think that that's the mainstream
Well,
conversation. I
I
just don't.
I don't maybe think that it is the norm yet, but I do think what we're seeing, and I started identifying this trend from right directly after the 2016 election, and it's only gotten bigger the more I've been paying attention to it, is I think that we are going to see, because there is a lack of leadership on the right now. Like,
Sure.
Trump is really not out there all that much. I mean, he's doing some stuff, he's making some speeches, but he's not saying anything differently than what he's been saying for months. And I would argue that he's not really providing real leadership in a genuine way. They're not getting leadership from the RNC. I think that we are going to see a rise.
What would that look like
for someone to take charge?
So let's.
I think it would take someone.
So Trump is going back to doing rallies.
Yeah.
So no. So this is a genuine question. I'm not saying I have an answer, but I think.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think this is an
okay.
important distinction to make, that, or to at least try to define or come up with a concept. Like, what would it look like? What does leadership from the right look like? Like, let's say Trump, let's say he was doing it. He's banned on Twitter. He's banned on Facebook. No news outlet will have him. But he's doing interviews with people like Dave Rubin and stuff. He's going to CPAC, but anything of him gets censored. So by the way, I'm not saying that he is leading. I'm just saying, would we even know it if he was trying?
I think we would. Trump puts out press releases all the time that then get screen capped and shared on Twitter and shared out there. But I mean, your point is well taken. It's like, does he even have the capacity to lead? But what Trump very could easily do is nominate someone to act in his stead, right? Like, he could put Rick Grenell out and have him be like front and center. He could put, I don't know, any of his other underlings out there to have them be like the spokesperson for this thing. But what real leadership would look like, I'm sorry, if there was real leadership in the Republican Party, Ronna McDaniel would not be the chair of the RNC. I'm sorry, and by the way, Trump endorsed her. So
he endorsed a lot of people. I think that he was an outsider to the Republican Party. I think we have to give him some credit to where he was a Democrat. He came in and the people were like, these are who you trust. And he was drinking from a fire hose for a long time in terms of like trying to figure out what was what. And I think that's one of the reasons there was so much chaos is that you just don't know. And so you just know these are the people you talk to. And so, yeah, but point taken. I'm just saying, I don't know. I mean, like, did you see his op-ed that he wrote about getting critical race theory out of schools?
Well, you know why I don't believe him? Because he's basically endorsed Chris Sununu. I don't believe a word Trump says on critical race theory.
Well, I think he probably doesn't have a good understanding of what I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt in that case, because like, what makes more sense, that Trump did this 1776, curriculum. He gave multiple speeches about it. He issues executive orders. He writes an op-ed, post presidency about how they need to get this out of schools. But he secretly likes it and
I don't think he's
well acquainted with well acquainted with what Chris Sununu is doing. Okay, let's take that last part back. He's very well acquainted that Chris Sununu supports it and he endorsed him, or he only has so many hours in a day to know what's going on, and he got a few bullet points on Chris Sununu and some certain policies, and he endorsed him over that. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that one personally.
But I mean, to me, that says that he's not really, like, if you're endorsing a candidate and you do not know that candidate completely undercut the Republican Party in his own state, like, I'm sorry, that's a problem. But
no, you're right.
And I don't think Trump supports critical race theory. Of course, I think Trump is opposed to critical race theory. But this goes back to the larger issue of the Republican Party shooting themselves in the foot time and time again for no good reason. And I don't even know where we were going with this.
Well, so go back. You were talking about
what does leadership look like?
Yes, because I think that's an important thing for us to figure out. Because if we can figure out what it is, then we'll know when they have it or what it kind of looks like. Because I agree with you that they don't have any leadership, right? I agree with you that there is a vacuum, but I don't know what the capacity is for a leader to come about because of the news media.
Okay. I'm gonna explain why I think there is not a current leader that is acceptable in the Republican Party, and I think I'm also going to explain why I think that means that there's going to be a rise of very bad people controlling the right. There needs to be a proactive vision for what the Republicans stand for. What do they want to do? What policies do they support? Why should people support them instead of oppose the other guy? What types of, how, in what ways are they going to help people? What is their vision for the reality of America in 2028, assuming that we elect them to the presidency in 2024 and maybe give them the House or something in 2022? What is the vision that we are shooting for? That does not exist. It does not exist at all. But you know where it does exist? In this moral majority, Christian conservative part 2 thing that is rising on the right now. That I started seeing this on, like, I don't call out trends until I see them in person, right? I don't call out trends based on what I see people talking about on Twitter. I don't call out trends based on what I see the news media talking about. I will only call something out when I actually see it in person for myself at an event, in the real world, something like that. I started right after the election, started seeing the Nick Fuentes types gaining a lot of steam at in-person events. And that has only picked up steam as things have gone on. And then what I see the kind of like, I'll call them normal conservatives, for lack of a better term, people who maybe aren't like buying into this whole like conservative, like American, not when I say American first, like Nick Fuentes agenda, that's different than Trump's America first thing, right? Those are Groyper crap. Those are two completely different things. So what, like, I see these kind of like normal conservatives, they don't buy in to what Nick Fuentes and that ilk is doing, but they kind of look at it and they go, oh, they have some nice points. They're not that bad. We shouldn't denounce them just because they're talking like white nationalists. Like they're making
Who are
some
some
good
examples
points.
of people you've seen do that? Like
I'm
mainstream
talking just
conservatives.
I'm not talking about influencers. I'm talking about everyday people.
Okay.
And that to me is actually
Gotcha.
much more impactful than like a blue check influencer. I'm talking about people that
Totally.
like, you know, I'll just have conversations with them at like CPAC or like another, like a rally or something where they go, well, they're not that bad. And I'm like, they are that bad. And they're like, well, no, they're just, you know, I don't agree with everything, but they make some good points. And it's like this inclination of normal conservatives to just defend everything that the bad actors in their party are doing by saying, oh, they make some good points and we need to keep an open mind and all this stuff, that is going to directly lead to these bad actors gaining control of the right in a way that I don't think they're going to be able to wrestle back from quickly. And they're doing it purely because Nick Fuentes, like him or hate him, he's providing a vision. He's providing a really concrete vision for what they're moving towards. And we've been seeing for months now conversation around that specific vision and like who should be allowed and what should be the values and a more like socially conservative agenda that is frankly not going to appeal in any way, shape, or form to people like us who are not socially conservative.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I am socially conservative. I just don't want it legislated. So I agree with you. My point is that like
we'll meet in the middle there. We agree that it should be legislated.
Yeah, it's just like I want, like, I mean, we had this talk with the conversation with the Caitlyn Jenner thing where I'm like, elect Caitlyn Jenner. Like, don't fight losing battles. These are stupid hills to die on. Even if these are things I disagree with. And so my point is like, yeah, like I do, yes, have an understanding of what you're talking about. I don't know if you saw the thing about there, I guess, you know, and part of it is like some of these things, Nick Fuentes is not someone, in my personal experience, I've not met a single person who has in any way, shape, or form validated anything that comes from the alt-right. I have not met, like, in person. I've had a few like Twitter comments or YouTube comments, okay? But in person, and I mostly interact with conservatives in person because all my lefty friends abandoned me and blocked me. I don't know anyone. And I think part of that might be, and what's funny is that I do largely run in, at least not run in, but am around in person, like Christian conservatives. But they do not, I've not heard anyone say anything that even remotely validates any of that crazy alt-right Groyper stuff. But I do see what you're saying in terms of there does seem to be that kind of return to the more, like you said, socially conservative Christian thing. And I think the problem is, and you can give me your thoughts on this, because this is an example of it that I think might be a gray area, where it's like, okay, I can kind of understand where they're coming from. So did you see about how there was that porn star who was invited to CPAC, Florida porn star who was invited to CPAC, and then there's a bunch of people who are like, well, there's going to be minors at this event, and like the fact that there is like these specific events with this porn star, it's like how many parents who would have maybe been cool bringing their like 16, 17-year-old conservative kids to CPAC are now going, okay, but I don't want if they're going to have some event with a porn star. It's like that's one of those things where I see both sides of that, I guess, where it's like I can see the perspective of a parent who's always went to CPAC before and just heard like normal traditional conservative stuff, and now if they're going to have like a porn star who their Twitter is like naughty America, and stuff, it's like I can see where that's like, what are you doing? I don't really see how what that's trying to appeal to. But at the same time, there is overreach there that can happen. So if that might be a situation that I do agree with them, at least I can see where they're coming from and say, well, if you're going to do that, you should maybe have that person have their own thing over here, not be on the stage where it's separate from where the minors might be. There's probably a way to do that, but then you get into like those two wackos that you talked to several months ago who were talking about how there shouldn't be gay people and stuff. Now, but again, I think that's a fringe. But I mean, to your point, is it might not be fringe for that much longer if that's the only opinion that's being put forth. So I can see where you're coming from on that. It should be ignored, I guess. Could I at least say this? Even if I think it's fringe, it probably shouldn't be ignored, and it should probably be taken seriously, as a threat.
Here's one of the things. Like, so in my former life, I taught a workshop actually called the leadership workshop, in which I went through kind of like the 3 stages of leadership when you're trying to get like a project going in your work environment or what have you. Like, here are the things you need to do to successfully manage a project or do change management or any of those things in businesses. The number one thing you need to do is build a vision for what you want to achieve. That's the very first thing. If you do not build that vision, you ain't getting anything accomplished. The problem is that on the right now, the only people that are offering a vision for what they want to achieve are really bad actors. And so in an absence of any other vision, because the Republican Party seems to downright refuse to develop a vision, here's what they always say to me. They're like, Carlin, we just want to pull the government out of things. All right, well, that's called being a libertarian.
Yeah.
Like what, like, how does that work in practice? What does that mean? What bills do you want to introduce? What are your priorities?
So I really like this. I like where this is going. Could we make a distinction between, so whenever you say that the only people on the right putting forth the vision are bad actors, could we say there are some of them bad actors, but others of them are just naive and outdated? And like, I think that there are like Christians, like I think someone like a Lauren Chen, roaming millennial, Allie Beth Stuckey, I would put, like, those are good actors. Those are people who I trust, who I know are well-intentioned, and might have that same vision that we're talking about in terms of the social stuff, not the alt-right. Like Lauren Chen, not alt-right. Neither is Allie Beth Stuckey.
No, they're not.
Who I don't think that they are. I have nothing but I trust what at least their intentions. I don't think they're poorly motivated at all.
I agree.
Does that make sense? So could we at least say that it's bad actors, and that there's also some people who are probably just naive, and aren't really thinking long-term, like winning strategy here?
Well,
is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And I think, this is an important point in that I'm not suggesting that all Christians are bad actors or that all Christians are part of this movement. That is not what I'm trying to infer at all. And I do agree with you. I think that Lauren Chen and Allie Beth Stuckey do a great job. And actually, Allie Beth, she did a show the other day in which she directly called out the rise of white identitarianism at the end of it. And I was like, yes.
Good. No,
yes.
She's great.
Because these are the things that need to be called out. So no, I do think there's a distinction, and I don't even know that I would say they're naive. I think that the distinction I would make is the people that I see actually setting the vision are bad actors, but they're a small percent at the top, right? It's just like the woke left, right? There are malicious people at the very top on the woke left that are proactively setting the agenda that is specifically designed to destabilize our society. And then there's a lot of people that are implementing that agenda, either because they're coming from a place of naivete, ignorance, whatever it is, they think it's what they need to do to be good people. It's exactly the same thing on the right. I think there are a very small percentage of really bad actors that are sadly are the only ones that are currently setting a proactive vision for what the political right is in this country. And I think there are a lot of people that are kind of following along to that and saying, all right, we might go along with this just because it's frankly the only vision that's being set, because the RNC, the GOP, Trump, whoever you want to put in that role, seems to have completely abdicated any responsibility in this area.
Yeah, I think so. The only thing I would add to that is that I would make a distinction between the people, because how many people, let's take a straw poll of people that voted Republican in 2020. And of those people, how many of them know what a groyper is? Or how many of them know who Nick Fuentes is? I bet you less than 20%.
Okay. How many people know who Ibram X. Kendi is?
Right. Well, more than that, just because of the news. But here's where I'm going with this, okay? Is that I would make a distinction between, and I'm saying these are two groups, right? I'm not saying that the group you're describing doesn't exist. They probably do. But it seems to me that the majority of conservatives right now are kind of like my friend who texted me, who they're kind of in a holding pattern, who they're just like going back to living their lives because they don't know what else to do. And I think conservatives do this thing where it's like, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but like, you know, the love languages, the 5 love languages.
I do. Yeah.
And so like part of the love languages is that you receive, like you interpret love in the way that you most feel loved, and you give love in the way that you most feel loved. And so like my wife, so one of her love languages might be quality time. And, you know, so she might spend a bunch of time like with me, and she's saying, I love you. And me, I'm like, yeah, we're just hanging out. You know, I don't receive it as that. And so I think people are prone to treat other people within the same value structure that they themselves hold to, and how their likes and dislikes. And so my point is that I think most conservatives, since they just want to be left alone, are prone to, during times like this, to just checking out, because that's what they want. Like they're like, I just want to be left alone, so I'm going to check out and go back to living my life, because that's just the thing that I want anyway. That's the way that I am, and I assume that that's the way things are, and that's the way. And I think that's one of the reasons why conservatives often don't do stuff, is because they're like, well, if I just want to be left alone, then I'm going to default to inaction over action, because I don't want to bother other people, and, you know, because I don't want them to bother me. And so my point is that I think that whatever the reason is, the right is clearly directionless. Whether you have a whole bunch of them that are just in a holding pattern, a bunch of them that are just watching Fox News and think that we're just in the next part of the culture war, some of them that are being radicalized, and some of them that are watching some be radicalized and maybe just kind of nodding along and thinking it's not a big deal. Whatever that pie chart looks like, you know, it's a very small sliver that is like action oriented towards something good, you know, and I think that's the main point here. And the picture that just came to my mind as you're describing that is we have this group, and I think it is safe to say that we have this group on the left and on the right, on the fringe, that is probably getting a little bigger. I think the one on the left is bigger than the one on the right, and I think the one on the left has a bigger microphone, but I think the one on the right is going to slowly catch up, especially as the right loses more and more elections. And as more and more of them, regular people, are told they're racist pieces of shit for the color of their skin. Like, yeah, that's going to happen. People are going to get radicalized. Brett Weinstein brought this up, I think 3 years ago, where I remember it was 3 years ago, because it was in the summer, and he was like, because he was talking about Portland, and he's like, they're going to create the monster that they claim to be fighting. And so, but my question to you is, so I had this picture of like, you have this fringe that's like slowly growing. So if let's say we have, think about like any movie where there's the walls are coming in, right? And you have the people in the middle. How long do you think, because one of the things we talked about earlier is like weird ass infighting on the right. Like, you know, you said people that are just distracted or just have these policy proposals that are just completely wacko and missing the point. How much do you think it'll take for, because to me, that's a sign that the pressure isn't as high as it could be. Like those things fall by the wayside whenever your back's against the wall and you know your back's against the wall. So how long, like how much do you think it'll take for, and how big will these fringes get on the left and on the right before you see the people on the middle left and the people on the middle right, and they're back and back and back, and then they realize they're back to back and are like, okay, I guess we're in this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there is more of an extremist edge on the right than people think. You know, about a month ago, I kicked the hornet's nest of actual white identitarians. And so I've had a front row seat to seeing what they're doing. And I'm also working with journalists to try to like investigate this and figure it out. I think it has already grown a lot more than people think it has. I mean, listen, if you had asked me like, you know, 6 months ago, like, you know, what does the white identitarian movement look like in the United States? I would have said maybe a couple thousand people that are true believers, and it's really not that big of a deal and something that we don't need to worry about. I do not believe that now. I think it is 10 times minimally 10 times larger than we think it is. I think that it is growing extremely quickly. I've watched how they recruit people to it. I've seen how people react to it. I've seen how the right inherently, like, because like what the right always does, right, is they just push back against the left. So whatever if the left says ABC, the right says XYZ. And that's all that they do. And so when the left is a constant, like especially with critical race theory gaining more and more prominence, what I'm seeing is a lot of people on the right push back against that, just to push back against it and not thinking through the consequences of their actions. And so then they say, well,
or the way that they're pushing back against it.
Or and then they say, well, we're not the real racists. I mean, like that's not such a thing. We're just defending our white values. Like the things that the white identitarian movement is calling itself right now, they're calling it white well-being, white positivity. They're calling it white survival. There is a very large chunk of people who honestly and truly believe that there will be a white Holocaust any day now. This is not a theory. And I think that it's a lot bigger than people think it is. And I think we're going to start seeing it more and more and more. But the problem is the media is not going to cover it.
No. Well, no. Yes, the media does cover it because they need to use it to smear all of the right.
I don't think they are. I don't think they will. And the reason I say that is because
when it pokes its head up, look at Charlottesville, man. Look at Charlottesville. How many people still think that Charlottesville?
I understand, but I have directly reached out to the Washington Post with evidence of this, and they're ignoring it. I proactively, when I tried to get the right to cover this, and I could only get a few journalists to actually take this seriously and to start doing actual investigative journalism, I was like, screw it. Like, I don't care if the New York Times publishes this as long as someone sees it. So I started reaching out. I was like, of course they're going to publish this. This is going to make the entire right look bad. This is like their fucking heyday. This is like what they live for. They're not covering it either.
So that's actually really interesting and scary and confusing, by the way. I'm sure that was confusing for you. I mean, it's confusing for me to hear that. And to your credit, by the way, whenever that was all happening, you're talking about, kicking this hornet's nest. So there was that. So here's just one example of that I saw firsthand where I'm like, yeah, this is, and I've gotten, whenever I did, there's a few threads I've done on Twitter where I get a bunch of groypers, replying, and it's like, whatever, so I can't remember what the name of that one shitbag channel was that did a video about you.
And we don't want to name them anyway.
Right. But so here is the thing is that I went to that person's channel and they don't have very many subs, and it's like, okay, whatever.
20,000 subs is a lot of subs. Given that we only think that this movement is
how much does the Flat Earth Society have? I mean, it's like, to me, that doesn't, it's like, okay, but here's the point. That I watched, so that person had on, so I used to watch this conservative podcast, Matt Christensen. Are you familiar with him? Have you heard of Matt Christensen?
I know the name, yeah.
He does really, really great scripted videos about events that are about maybe 8 to 12 minutes long, where he'll has a script and he talks about things and he investigates things, and they are extremely well done. Like Matt Christensen nails it whenever it comes to those things. And he does a live stream with a co-host named Blonde, who has her own YouTube channel called Blonde in the Belly of the Beast. And she used to she was a former lefty who lived in, I believe, Washington, and then got married, moved to Utah. And they do a live stream on Wednesdays and Sundays. And I used to listen to them like regularly, you know, and doing super chats and everything. And this is like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I started to hear Blonde start to say, like, because they would do these like hoax hate things, or they would cover like hoax hate crimes, you know, and they would do a really good job of covering these things because no one else covers them, right? And I would hear Blonde start to say stuff that I'm like, that feels like low-key racist. And for whatever reason, I stopped listening to Matt. It wasn't, and I will still listen to some of his like scripted videos, but I stopped listening to live streams. Well, whenever I go to investigate that one shitbag's channel, who he had on earlier in the day from that day he made that video about you was Blonde. And Blonde's channel has 124,000 subs, Blonde in the Belly of the Beast. I don't know how many Matt has. And by the way, I never heard Matt echo the same things as her. So I'm not saying Matt is in this category. I don't know that. I don't have any reason to think that. But I listened to her interview with that guy, and it was absolutely a conversation about trying to create white communities. And about being in, and they were using the same things like white well-being. And she was talking about some city that she was in, you know, either in Idaho or something like that. And how there is a person there who was from, she said, Boston, and who had just moved there from Boston because it was getting, you know, too violent, too crazy or whatever. And Blonde was talking to this gal, and the woman was like, well, you know, the only thing about here is it's not very diverse. And, you know, Blonde was like, I wanted to be like, why? Like, you just moved from a place that was diverse and it had all this crime. Like, what do you think? You know? And so it's like, they were having this conversation that and here's the problem, is they were saying things that I would say the premise. So this is something where it's like, you take a person on a far left progressive radical who they'll say, I graduated college with all this debt. I can't get a job. I can't afford my rent. I don't have health care. Therefore, capitalism sucks and we should have communism. Okay.
Right.
So they take a premise that is fundamentally right, and their conclusion is batshit crazy. So Blonde said some things that her premise was not wrong. She's like, you know, honestly, I had the realization that all white people are treated like mutts. If you're from any other country, you can have pride specific to your country, but if you're white, you're just white. You're just a mutt. You can't have any type of like Irish pride or Ukrainian pride or Italian pride.
I have Irish
like
pride
that.
every St. Patrick's Day, I'll have you know.
I do too, but same. I do too, but the point is that it's not celebrated in our culture, like to do that. If someone wanted to do that. And she's like, I realized that all white people are just treated like this like white, like kind of mutt thing where it's like, no, I have an actual heritage. I have an actual culture that I came from. And she's like, and that's something that I wanted to learn more about. And she's like, and I got to learn, okay, this is where most of my ancestors came from. And I visited that part of Europe, and it was really cool. And like that, all of that stuff, I was like, that makes sense. Like my family is on my mom's side is almost 100% Irish. My grandpa was first generation. His parents came over here on a boat. And so we would go to these traditional Irish celebrations. I grew up with a lot of pride in my Irish heritage. So like, that's fair enough. Right. But then the conversation takes this turn into how do we have like somehow trying to understand your heritage goes into, well, how do we have these white homogeneous communities? And I'm like, whoa. This is the turn here, right? Like you said some things. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see your perspective, but no part of me, because I think my Irish heritage is interesting, makes me want to live in a community with no brown people, right? Like that's crazy.
Right.
Right. And so, but my point is that what you're saying there about how like this is, it's not necessarily this overt Zig Heil kind of thing, but it's not very thinly veiled either in terms of the racism that's there. And like that's just one example. And I'm sure that there are other examples like that of people that, so Blonde, like I said, 124,000 subs. That channel's grown since the last time I saw it, not by much. I think the last time I saw it a couple years ago was 80,000. But either way, so that's just one thing. And so you're not wrong to identify that, yeah, there is this threat there that is being ignored. And I think it's being ignored because of the same reason people ignore the threat on the left, where they just don't think it's that big of a deal. But whenever I saw that, I was like, yeah, okay. How many more examples are there like this of, content creators who might have 40, 50, 60,000, maybe more, maybe 124,000 followers, that are starting to kind of go down this road of, wouldn't it just be easier if there were no minorities in our community?
And Truman, I'll tell you what, I don't know how much time you spend on Telegram, but if you,
I don't get on Telegram. No.
I rarely get on Telegram unless I absolutely have to. But the times that I have gotten on Telegram, I am seeing a lot of extreme people that have been banned in other areas, congregating together, hundreds of thousands of people in these groups talking about these concepts, talking about more extreme things than I can even say on it's heart-wrenching, the conversations that I've seen on Telegram. I think this is a much bigger problem than people think it is. It is something that has genuinely like contributed to my extreme blackpilling at the moment, because it's just, maybe it's just because I've been submerged in it for the last month, but it is genuinely upsetting to me and not surprising because, again, this was well, I think this is like completely predictable that it happened. I mean, a lot, like, Brett Weinstein's been saying this for years. I started saying this as soon as I realized, because again, it's like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's just life. Life will always find a way to balance out. And so it is completely unsurprising that this has happened, but it's really upsetting. And what's the most upsetting thing to me is that it genuinely seems like no one cares.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where it's like, there's probably an aspect to where, so if someone told me, rank your top 5 biggest like fears right now, what are the top 5 biggest things that you think are threats to the stability of America? I probably wouldn't put white nationalists in the top 5.
No, I wouldn't.
Now, here's what and the other part of that is
not now.
Totally not now. The other part of that is that I think if we solve these other things, like if we, like the crazy shit on the left, that's what's radicalizing these people on the right.
Yes.
And so I think it's like, if we solve that, or at least we get the fire hose on that to cool that shit off and get those people out of the picture, then I think that you're not going to get, because like you said, it's a reaction. And at the same time, there are people that are coming out of those movements too. I think it is growing, but there are people coming out of those movements. I read a book maybe like 4 months ago that it was a Christian book about a lot of the stuff that's going on in the culture right now. And it included testimonies of people that had been brought out of the white nationalist movement from being exposed to, well, not just Christianity, but like minorities, and seeing that this stuff's evil. So, I mean, we don't know what the churn is. I think we also can look at those YouTube numbers and say, we don't know how many of those are American, right? Like we do know that there is that the white nationalist movement is much stronger in Europe right now because of what's going on with the immigration crisis in places like Sweden and Germany and France. And so it's like, we don't know that those are all Americans. And so I think that you're right to be concerned. And again, like I said, when I saw that with Blonde, I was listening to that, I was like, holy shit, man. Like, this is okay. Like, this is for real. At the same time, I think that those people are not going to have an audience whenever we have significantly less people that are being told they're bad because they're white, or that they have some type of collective racial guilt for any bad thing that happened in America's past, even if they're like a recent immigrant, and so yeah, I my point is that is a concern, but I think these other things that are the bigger threat, if we solve those, then that other part's going to take care of itself, because those people aren't going to have a thing to unite against. It'll be like,
I agree.
it's kind of back to normal.
No, I agree. I would not place it in the top 5 current threats to our society.
Yeah.
I just think it's like, I mean, like you said, like if it is dependent on us solving the top 5 or even the top 3 or maybe even the top 1 current threat to our society, I just don't know if I have faith that we're going to be able to do it.
Fair enough. What do you think is the top 1? If you were to distill down the number 1 thing that is responsible for all of this crap right now, what do you think it is?
Woke culture, critical race theory, however you want to define that. I think that like woke culture, the far left agenda, is the number 1 existential crisis that our country is facing. And it's simply because they've been working on it for so long. They have a 40, 50 year head start on us. And it's like, this is not something, people seem to think that this can be rolled back just by banning critical race theory. 1, that's not going to happen. 2, the laws are going to be ignored anyway. 3, this is about culture change. I think the number 1 threat that we're facing right now is the fact that we are in a cultural revolution right now. And I always come back to this
color revolution, right? Color revolution, what they're called.
Yeah.
Where they create all this unrest. Yeah.
Exactly. And I DM'd James Lindsay, several months ago, and I said, has any society come back from this once this has started? Like that you know of? Because can we just reverse engineer what happened? And he said, nope. I was like, great, thanks, James. Good pep talk.
One kind of did. One kind of did.
Which one?
I think France after the French Revolution.
Oh, that's interesting.
They're not in a good spot now,
right.
but France did not. I mean, they literally erected a shrine to the goddess of reason. In the Notre Dame.
You're right.
And it was really bad. So I think that, I mean,
they did execute the royal family.
Yeah. So they did. You could say that France did kind of come back. I mean, France, they're definitely not in the same place that they were in the, late.
So maybe that's something to look
century.
to, because I don't know enough about France and what happened leading up to the French Revolution and then what happened after it. I just don't have any context for this. It's not something I've studied at all.
It's the rubble. It's the ashes, man. It has to burn. The whole thing burns and collapses, basically. It's not good.
Okay. So it is going to get worse before it gets better.
100%. Oh yeah. I mean, look at a country like Ukraine right now. Was in the Soviet Union, and now they're, oh yeah, duh, right? Okay,
married to a Ukrainian.
That's right, yeah. So I mean, but look at Ukraine right now. It's come a long way.
Well,
it's not good, but it's well, sure. But I mean, that's how much of that is their fault, and how much of that is just residual damage from who's the guy is it Viktor Orban? Is that Ukraine or is that Hungary? That might be Hungary.
I'm not
sure.
Viktor
Orban. Viktor Orban's like this kind of right, people think he's alt-right. I don't know. I can't get a good read on him, but he does say some things that are true. But it's one of those things where I don't know if the negative impressions I have from him are because I read about him in a New York Times article,
right,
or if that's how he genuinely is. So that's the other thing I hate is what if this guy is actually a Nazi? But the left has made it to where if everyone's a Nazi, then no one is, right? So you just dismiss it whenever they actually do say those things. But anyway, my point is they can come back from it, but it's just there's a lot of collateral damage that has to occur, and that is the problem. Is it's like I don't want to I don't want to be part of that a part of that collateral damage, man.
Oh yeah, well, we're the person in the gulag.
I think the number 1 threat. Oh yeah, well, dude, you live in a state with a lot of libertarians. I live in the mountains, man.
We're gonna be fine.
They won't get to us for a while.
No.
Yeah, be okay. I think the number 1 threat is universities. Personally, I mean, I think they're the ones who are churning out this culture.
Same thing. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Like you're talking more practically. I'm talking more theoretically. You're talking practically.
Totally. Yeah, we're saying the same thing, just different. I would say, but that's like the epicenter. I think that's patient zero. I used that kind of hive mind, like shimmer kind of thing, and I think the original shimmer was the universities,
Mm-hmm.
and then they spread out to cities. There's a guy, super interesting thinker. His locals is Ides of Ideas, and I've had a couple conversations with him. And one thing he pointed out that has just been stuck in my mind ever since we talked like maybe a couple months ago, and he said that whenever communities were first founded in the United States, they were founded with the church at the middle.
Mm.
And that was meant to be like, this is the epicenter of the values of this community. And even as cities got bigger, where they had like different districts,
Mm-hmm.
they would put a church at the middle of those districts.
Mm.
And it was like, this is supposed to be the middle of, this is our kind of North Star for the values that we're supposed to be about as a community. And he said, and then something changed where it started to be the universities
Right.
that were at the middle of the cities. That was the North Star of the values of these cities instead of the churches. And I was like, do you know how brilliant that is, man, in terms of just understanding the phenomena that has taken place and how these cities have been taken over by this thing about how it went from the universities to like the cities and then to everywhere else. I'm like, that is one of the best observations I think I've heard in the last couple of years.
It really is. No, I agree. That's and that's indicative of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're at about 2 hours here, man. What do you think?
I gotta go do some stuff, but I think
How
we
do you
had
want to end it?
well, so I mean, I guess we've identified the problem. I don't know. Maybe that's where we end for today. Is we've identified the problem. I don't
Fair
know.
enough. Yeah.
That's
The problem.
important. I mean, let's not discount that.
No. I think you're right.
You know.
You kind of have to know what it is you're dealing with in order to. I mean, well, and it's the problem is multifaceted, right? It's this ideology and people that are complacent to it.
Right. And hey, Truman, we're gonna see each other this week, aren't we?
We are. That I'm excited for that. The thing in Tampa. We'll have to talk about that on the next one.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's gonna be a lot of fun. So for those of you who are listening, thank you for tuning in. Please follow Carlin at Dr. Dr.
KARLY
Is it
.com. No, so okay, so
BORYSENKO?
yeah,
right?
yeah. So the best way to follow me is just like Carlin Borisenko, or go to my website drcarlin.com, and my locals community obviously kb.locals.com.
KB is a lot easier to remember. I was trying to do your
Exactly.
Twitter handle first, and I couldn't remember if it was at Carlin, but at Carlin is your local.
Well, it's like why I have to shorten it to the smallest possible thing. No one like my first name and last name are equally problematic.
Fair enough. And for me, you guys can follow me on Twitter at My Mundane Mind, returntoreason.locals.com, Return to Reason on YouTube, and ThinkSpot, and all of those other places. And so, yeah, we appreciate you guys listening. Hopefully, this is at least entertaining enough for you. And thanks for coming along with us as we think about this stuff. So we'll see you next time.
All right.
Peace.